Group's distinguished to the first lecture of the Mahanirban Calcutta Research Group's distinguished lecture series on the occasion of its 25th anniversary. Mahanirban Calcutta Research Group, or CRG as it is more popularly known, is a Kolkata-based research institute leading research on migration and forced migration in South Asia for the past quarter century. CRG was born out of peacemaking initiatives by the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy in the late 90s and brought under its umbrella a diverse array of academics, public intellectuals, media persons, artists, activists, and students. CRG is now well known for its research and advocacy work on themes relevant to the pursuit of democracy, peace building, migration, and refugee studies. I am Samata. I am a member of CRG. I shall be moderating the lecture today. This lecture, titled The Universalism of the Oppressed, B.R. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, will be delivered by Professor Ranabir Samaddar, who is the Distinguished Chair in Migration and Forced Migration Studies here at CRG, and one of its founding members. Professor Samaddar is one of the most prolific contemporary philosophers and critical thinkers, publishing widely on issues of refugeehood, statelessness, biopolitics, and capitalism, populism, and everything else in between. Some of his recent books are The Post-Colonial Age of Migration, the co-edited volumes, India's Migrant Workers and the Pandemic, Migrants and the Neoliberal City. A monograph is the Political Ecology, another co-edited volume is The Political Ecology of Survival. He's written A Post-Colonial Inquiry into Europe's Debt and Migration Crisis, He's The Marginal Nation, and many, many more. In today's lecture, Professor Samaddar undertakes the task of reading Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, published in 1935 after Dr. Ambedkar was stopped from delivering his presidential addresses at a Hindu reformist congregation. A central tract of the construction of modern India, Annihilation of Caste has inspired millions of activists and academics thinking their way through and opposing the caste system in India. We look forward to Professor Samaddar's exposition and analysis of the universalisms of the oppressed that manifest themselves and arise out of specificities. This is a hybrid lecture. Some of us are here at CRG office. Our colleagues are here and friends are here as well, while many of you have joined us online. Plus, there are participants who have joined us live on Facebook. For online participants, please do leave your questions and comments in the chat box or the Q&A box. For those who have joined us physically, I'll request you to ask your questions directly to Professor Samaddar, and either he or I will paraphrase them for the online participants. So Professor Samaddar, now over to you.
Thank you, Samata. Am I audible?
Yes, it's audible.
Okay. This is essentially a book reading session. It's not a long talk, but there are several excerpts, and one should study those excerpts, but other sections of the small book also rigorously. So I think that I shall take a little more time than the usual, time allotted to such a talk, so that I can read out at least some of the excerpts. This continues the book reading session that CRG initiated more than a decade ago, and I recall Onnesha, one of our very dear colleague and an earlier staff member at CRG, who took the initiative in holding such book discussions. And if I'm not wrong, I think I met Samata for the first time when she came for such a discussion. And Shomir, Paula, Shoboshachi, Shomir in particular, in fact, he was also very interested and eager to continue this session. Anita, I remember, organized several sessions. So the universalism of the oppressed in B.R. Ambedkar's The Annihilation of Caste. This talk is divided in 3 sections. The first section briefly tells the problematic that I set out and basically the problem that I want to address through a reading of the book. The second section discusses some of the sections of the book, some of the parts of the book, and in that light, and the concluding section tries to tell or tries to figure out the implications of the argument. So basically, it is a discussion on the book, and as I said, the talk by commentary in itself is not very long, but it involves close reading of some of his arguments and style of argument. One of the realities of the post-colonial condition is that any transformative discourse originating in the post-colonial world is likely to be subsumed under Western discourses that go by the name of universalism, which assumes that categories originating and developed in the West have universal relevance and application. Taking the cue, ironically, from Hegel, the high priest of the universal, some have taken this concern seriously and have spoken of the concrete universal. As is known to students of philosophy, Hegel's tripartite division of the logic into a logic of being, of essence, and finally of the concept indicates specific spheres or modes of conceptual as well as ontological determinacy. If the particulars fall outside the universal determinacy that they hold in common, then the form of universality is other than its content, which are the particulars. Thus, on one hand, the very particularity that is supposed to be accounted for by the universal falls outside the latter. And on the other hand, insofar as the universal stands over and against the particulars subsumed under it, it too can only be something particular. So what is universal? Though Hegel's has been seen as a philosophy of abstract universality that speaks of totalizing subsumption of particulars under an all-encompassing universal spirit itself, there is ground to think through the problem and think anew of what may be termed as the concrete universal, the mark of explicit determinacy. This talk is based on the background of this concern of concrete universal. I suggest that the problem is not around the universals. The problem is not also that the universal has to be concrete. The task is how to find out. The task is to find out how the process of concrete determination attains universal relevance or significance. The universal is thus not a passive exemplification of a neutral universality, but a concrete determination attaining its broader significance through a series of other concrete determinations. Indeed, in this way, the emancipative thoughts of the colonized, originating in particular conditions and aiming at resolving particular questions, have left for us a heritage of global validity. In this context, I aim to discuss a particular distinct text, B.R. Ambedkar's The Annihilation of Caste, 1936. I shall draw attention to some of the sections of this remarkable tract to show that its message is aimed at wider audiences by way of untying particular questions and resolving them. This has ensured global relevance to what Ambedkar wrote nearly 90 years ago. The emancipative ideas growing within the colonial and post-colonial milieu have much to offer in terms of a transformative thinking of the future, because these ideas attain universality, not through an espousal of universal principles, but through determining particular questions of society and politics. The determination of the concrete has been the way to attaining universal significance. This determination is not, however, a one-dimensional process. It is through a concrete process of interface of several determinations that a universal emerges. In the case of this remarkable manifesto, The Annihilation of Caste, the universal desire for non-discrimination, equality, justice, and abolition of race, caste, and colonialism emerges through concrete determinations of the associated questions. Ambedkar combats caste as the main form of religious, racial, and colonial oppression. The task is difficult, since struggle against caste oppression and discrimination is at the same time a struggle against religious injunctions and principles. Ambedkar demonstrates the paradox of the enunciation of the universal. He is skeptical towards the possibility of enunciating the universal that works as a tool of domination, yet he produces through his critique an ideal of the universal that has become a fact of common sense in post-colonial contemporary life in India and many other countries. He did not set out to erect a parallel and competing universal. Yet in his work, the determination of a concrete universal related to caste, religion, and colonialism remains an inescapable demand in politics, notably in practice. The universal of the dominant is impossible, is untenable. Not to enunciate the concrete universal through encounters with concrete problems is impossible. It is not just a case of conflict of universalities. It is a case of the relation between the idea of domination and the parallel enunciation of a universal. The enunciation of a parallel universal. The paradox constitutes the life of universality and the productive path that thinkers like Ambedkar took to lay out their visions of an alternative future. Let us reflect on some of the implications of B.R. Ambedkar's arguments in The Annihilation of Caste on the question of universalism. I shall consider three important ones. First, dwelling on the question of the supposed polarity between political platform and social reform, Ambedkar wrote, and I'm paraphrasing it, but I think some of you have the text or otherwise you will get it on the screen. The path of social reform is strewn with many difficulties. Social reform in India has few friends and many critics. The critics fall into two distinct classes. One class consists of political reformers, the other of the socialists. It was at one time recognized that without social efficiency, no permanent progress in other fields of activity was possible. That owing to mischief wrought by evil customs, Hindu society was not in a state of efficiency, that ceaseless efforts must be made to eradicate these evils. While the Congress was concerned with defining the weak points in the political organization of the country, the social conference, if you know the history, social conference was organized parallel to Congress in the very early years of the Indian National Congress. The social conference was engaged in removing the weak points in the social organization of the Hindu society. For some time, the two worked as wings of one common activity. But soon, the two wings developed into two parties, a political reform party and a social reform party, between whom there raged a fierce controversy. And Ambedkar then writes in the following lines that how the political part grew and the social part became less and less. And then he says that the political part became indifferent to social part. And he says that this indifference, this thinning of its ranks was soon followed by active hostility from the politicians. The spirit of enmity went to such a pitch that when the social conference desired to erect its own pandal, a threat to burn the pandal was held out by the opponents. Does it prove, Ambedkar puts the question, that the victory went to those who were in the right, that is, those who won for the day? Does it prove conclusively that social reform has no bearing on political reform? Unquote. In this way, to make a fundamental point, namely, that freedom is empty without social emancipation from bondage and caste oppression, Ambedkar brings in the duality of politics, society, or political reform, social reform, or upper caste nationalist politicians versus social reformers who wanted to do away with discriminations in society. More importantly, the point, politics that ignores social discriminations and caste oppressions cannot do any good to the colonized. For even once, you may note, there is no universal theory of equality or dignity here in the text. On the other hand, Ambedkar is confronting the universality of liberal constitutional politics with this sort of social reform. In the later part of the text, however, he even contests what goes on in the name of reform or in the nature of reform. Reform of caste system, reform of religious practices, or reform of religion. None of these items on the reformist agenda will work. These concrete determinations have implications for a universal cry for justice. Ambedkar continues with the same style of determining the concrete relation, this time between religion and discrimination and oppression. Let us hear him as he argues that the party of social reform lost out because it operated within the confines of a religion and did not break out of this stranglehold of religion. You can think of the Brahmo religion, you can think of the Arya Samaj and various others, or Gandhi. And Ambedkar says, the social conference was a body which mainly concerned itself with reform of the high caste Hindu family. It consisted mostly of enlightened high caste Hindus who did not feel the necessity for agitating for the abolition of caste or had not the courage to agitate for it. They felt quite naturally a greater urge to remove such evils as enforced widowhood, child marriages, etc., evils which prevailed among them. The battle was fought centered around the question of the reform of the family. It did not relate to social reform in the sense of the breakup of the caste system. The breakup of the caste system was never put in issue by the reformers. That is the reason why the Social Reform Party lost. And again, you can read the whole thing that is on screen. Ambedkar goes further and makes a significant observation in this context, without, of course, any grand declaration and only by way of putting a section heading, section 4, within quote, very significantly, caste is not just a division of labor, it is a division of laborers. He wrote under that section, there are many occupations in India which, on account of the fact that they are regarded as degraded by the Hindus, provoke those who are engaged in them to aversion. There is a constant desire to evade and escape from such occupations, which arises solely because of the blighting effect which they produce upon those who follow them. What efficiency can there be in a system under which neither men's hearts nor their minds are at their work? As an economic organization, caste is therefore a harmful institution, inasmuch as it involves the subordination of man's natural powers and inclinations to the exigencies of social rules. Unquote. If we leave aside for the present the argument that caste-based division of labor probably contributed to a particular mode of economy and its own logic of efficiency, we can note the way Ambedkar approaches the issue of within quote durable inequality, to borrow a phrase made famous much later by Charles Tilly, as growing from within a religious system. Hindu religion is interrogated here not on the basis of any eschatological judgment or theology or religious philosophy, but simply on a social historical basis. We must note also the way a particular determination which evolves into something of general significance is made. Religion is determined through a discussion on caste and vice versa. Thus, we hear Ambedkar saying further, there is an utter lack among the Hindus of what the sociologists call consciousness of kind. There is no Hindu consciousness of kind. In every Hindu, the consciousness that exists is the consciousness of its caste. This is the reason why the Hindus cannot be said to form a society or a nation. There are, however, many Indians who have insisted that underlying the apparent diversity, there is a fundamental unity which marks the life of the Hindus. Inasmuch as there is a similarity of habits and customs, beliefs and thoughts which obtain all over the continent of India, but one cannot accept the conclusion that therefore Hindus constitute a society. Men constitute a society because they have things which they possess in common. To have similar things is totally different from possessing things in common. See the difference between the two. And the only way, and this line is significant because I shall come back to it later, and the only way by which men can come to possess things in common with one another is by being in communication with one another. This is merely another way of saying that society continues to exist by communication. Indeed, in communication. To make it concrete, it is not enough that men act in a way which agrees with acts of others. Parallel activity, even if similar, is not sufficient to bend men into a society. So this is the first point where you can see how Ambedkar is determining the relation between caste and religion. Second, Ambedkar has to now engage with another relation, the relation of religion to the colonized society, but mainly the relation of society with religion. But remember, it is still a long way to arrive at a principle of universal equality. In the above excerpt, we can note Ambedkar has displaced Hinduism. In place of Hinduism, he is engaging with Hindus, just like if one were to discuss Christianity by discussing Christians. Remember, this was the way Christianity permitted slavery or Hinduism produced caste. This displacement is of radical significance, for besides other elements, the stress on communication. And recall the sentence that Ambedkar wrote, society continues to exist by communication, indeed in communication, unquote, tells us of the social reality of unequal communication and hence a society and a religious system based on inequality and injustice. Readers of Ambedkar know that the Annihilation of Caste was a lecture that remained undelivered. As the ferocity of the address scared the organizers, the leaders of the Caste Hindu Reform Organization named Jat Pat Todak Mandal of the forum who withdrew the invitation to him. The address was to be delivered at Lahore on the occasion of the annual conference of the forum in 1936. Having read the text of this speech circulated in advance, the organizers informed Ambedkar that as a Hindu social reform body, it was not possible for it to host a speech that declared that the speaker was addressing the audience the very last time as a Hindu within. After his address was cancelled, Ambedkar printed at his own expense the unmodified and unabridged text to make it available to the public. Excommunicated, thus, Ambedkar pitchforked communication as the basis of his campaign. Language in the Annihilation of Caste was deployed to interrogate key elements of the world of the Hindus, ideas and practices. The aim was to disrupt this world, to annihilate the world from which the ideas and practices that resulted in indignity of the humans had emerged. No universal rationality was invoked by Ambedkar. Indeed, the motto of annihilation, which would mean destruction, was not indirectly invoked in the address also. The word annihilation occurs only once after it was used in the title of the address. Yet, the conceptual world of Dalit that emerges from the address is one of insurgence that must finish off the social mental world of the Hindus. Nothing from the extant religious world is appropriated. It has to be simply expropriated. There is nothing in common within it. Therefore, communication has stopped. Ambedkar has spoken for the last time as a Hindu. Excommunication of the untouchables from the Hindu society does not free them. Excommunication replicates caste in the very space of the exile from caste. Therefore, the call for annihilation as a struggle against excommunication, and hence we can only repeat Ambedkar's words referred to a while ago, within quote, Hindu society as such does not exist. There is an utter lack among the Hindus of what sociologists call consciousness of kind. In every Hindu, the consciousness that exists is the consciousness of his caste. And religion cannot make a nation because a religious society cannot mend the fault lines within a society. To be modern, to develop, to be free and independent, grow into a society in which all will have common stakes, the ethics of a divisive religion must be done away with. Within quote, the effects of caste on the ethics of the Hindus is simply deplorable. Caste has killed public spirit. Caste has made public opinion impossible. A Hindu's public is his caste. His responsibility is only to his caste. His loyalty is restricted only to his caste. Virtue has become caste-ridden and morality has become caste-bound. Ambedkar notes further that upper caste scholars treat the institution of caste as race. Some have dug a biological trench, he writes, in defense of the caste system. It is said that the object of caste was to preserve purity of race and the purity of blood. Now, ethnologists are of opinion that men of pure race exist nowhere, and that there has been a mixture of all races in all parts of the world, especially this is the case with the people of India. And you can read the rest few lines. The caste system cannot be said to have grown as a means of preventing the admixture of races or a means of maintaining purity of blood. And therefore, Ambedkar confesses in an exasperating tone, my ideal, a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. Unquote. While scholars may scoff at this invocation of a tiring modernist ideal that has garbed in history many a conquest and domination, we must sense here the incipient cry for justice, dignity, and recognition. This is the universal. The universal cannot condone the classification of people towards perpetuating inequality. Because such classification, for instance, dividing people into 4 definite classes, would mean a forced, within quote, lumping of individuals into a few sharply marked off classes, unquote, completely obliterating the recognition that the individual is a being of infinite tendencies and possibilities. But this universal emerges not through the enunciation of a universal principle, but through a particular critique of nationalism, which shapes itself along particular caste lines. The dominant nationalist view regarded caste as an internal problem of Indian society that could be addressed and resolved once independence was attained. In this way, justification for considering caste as of secondary priority had been made. Ambedkar was now arguing back. How could a society that had not allowed freedom to its own members and did not have the conditions of freedom would attain genuine independence? The universal can emerge only through the negation of what passes on as the universal, in this case, the nation. Only through the process of concrete determinations, as in this case, determination of the concrete issue of nation or the colonial society, caste inequality, classificatory mode, religious domination, stranglehold of an ideology, etc. The old universe of the Hindus must be annihilated for a universal to emerge, because that universe is a closed one. Once again, it is important to note that the principles of justice were being enunciated by Ambedkar not through a general critique of the religion. The critique of Hindu religion is aimed at the latter's foundations in the idea and desirability
of a caste classified society. As he explained in the context of his long-held attraction to Buddhism, A, religion was necessary for a free society. B, not every religion was worth having. C, religion must relate to facts of life and not the theories and speculations about God or soul or heaven or earth. D, it was also wrong to make God the center of religion. Likewise, wrong to make salvation of the soul as the center of religion. E, real religion lived in the heart of man and not in the Shastras. F, it was not enough for morality to be the ideal of life. Since there was no God, it must become the law of life. And the function of religion was to reconstruct the world and to make it happy and not to explain its origin or its end. Private ownership of property brought power to one class and sorrow to another. And finally, all human beings were equal, and what was important is high ideals and not noble. You can see the impact of Buddhism on Ambedkar. As his other writings on Buddhism show, Ambedkar's principal concern was democracy. Hindu society was undemocratic. Buddhism had democratic nature and the potentiality to make society democratic. In that sense, Buddhism was a democratic religion. Fraternity never resulted from political arrangements. The religion must be democratic so as to promote equality. By the mid-50s, as we know, Ambedkar decided to convert to Buddhism. Thus, if the teaching of the Buddha was democratic, then democracy was not an invention of the West, but a product of the Indian history as well. In his historic speech of 25th November 1949, where he had presented the final draft of the Indian Constitution to the Constituent Assembly, which was to pass it on 26 January 1950, he had recalled the tradition of the republics and assemblies in ancient India of the Buddha's time. The increasing engagement with Buddhism happened in the last years of Ambedkar's life, as his interest in Marxism also grew. All his major writings during this period, like Buddha and the Future of His Religion, the Buddha and His Dharma, Buddha and Karl Marx, referred to Karl Marx as a central figure in the quest for democracy, equality, and justice. Now the third determination. The first was religious reform and political reform. The second was religion and caste. And the third is caste and nation. So how does it determine nation? Third, so as these overlapping arguments bring out, the nation as a given universal is also disputed and rejected. Ambedkar asks, why have the mass of people tolerated the social evils to which they have been subjected? He inquires, while there have been social revolutions in other countries of the world, why have there not been social revolutions in India? It is because the lower classes of Hindus have been completely disabled for direct action. They could not bear arms, and without arms, they could not rebel. Within, they were all plowmen, or rather condemned to be plowmen, and they were never allowed to convert their plowshares into swords. They were condemned to be lowly, and not knowing the way of escape and not having the means of escape, they became reconciled to eternal servitude, which they accepted as their inescapable fate. Unquote. Such a society lacks organic unity and cannot develop into a nation. Such a society has no sense of dignity, therefore it cannot be a nation. In his words, the question is not whether a community lives or dies, but on what plane does it live? There are different modes of survival, but not all are equally honorable. In this undelivered address, unquote, in this undelivered address, the nation as it is being shaped by the colonized society lurks in the background. Nowhere Ambedkar discusses or rejects the nation as a universal political organization, a nation as a society organized in a particular way. But he seems to interrogate all through and ask his audience, if this is your society, are you fit to be a nation? Or even if you develop as a nation, what kind of a nation will it be? What is this national that inheres and admits gross indignities and inequalities? What will then enable the Indians, within quote, most of whom are Hindus, to be a nation, fit to declare on the face of the alien rulers that India is a proud nation? He knows that the Hindus cannot become a nation, and he has decided to sever his links with Hinduism. He has to conclude, and he manages to place the question of nation, that is Swaraj or self-rule, with these remarks. Remember, unsayable, indeed unthinkable, in 1936. And he says, I'm sorry I will not be with you. I've decided to change. But even when I am gone out of your fold, I will watch your movement with active sympathy, and you will have my assistance for what it may be worth. Yours is a national cause. Caste is no doubt primarily the breath of the Hindus, but the Hindus have fouled the air all over. And everybody is infected, Sikh, Muslim, and Christian. You therefore deserve the support of all those who are suffering from this infection. Yours is more difficult than the other national cause, namely Swaraj. In the fight for Swaraj, you fight with the whole nation on your side. But in this, you will have to fight against the whole nation, and that too, your own nation. You can read, this is a very significant line. So the fight will be conducted, Ambedkar says, with the nation on its side, but the fight will be also against the nation. Remember, as Ambedkar later pointed out, within quote, a caste has all the exclusiveness and pride which a nation has. It is therefore not improper to speak of a collection of castes as a collection of major and minor nations, unquote. However, within quote, a caste is a nation, but the rule of one caste over another may not be admitted to the same as the rule of one nation over another. But supposing the caste is not carried so far, but is limited to majority and minority, even then the question remains, what right has the majority to rule the minority? Will minority rights suffice? Remember, these comments were made by Ambedkar at the end of World War I to a select committee when the whole question of reserved constituencies and reservation was being discussed just prior to the Montagu-Chelmsford Act. Admitting the necessity of self-determination for the untouchables, Ambedkar argued, communal representation could not be withheld from them for communal representation, that is representation for minority religion and not for caste. In those days, it would be called other backward communities. For communal representation and self-determination were but two different phrases which express the same notion. It's a very fine legal argument, but the whole argument was being made, as I said, unthinkable in 1918-19, when Ambedkar actually to the South Borough Committee makes this deposition. So how does then India become a nation? The implications of the answer that Ambedkar provided for politics-society relation are profound. In the midst of the Second World War, when the Indian nation had been irremediably communally divided, Ambedkar turned to the political life of Ranabir, 1842 to 1901, the great liberal of the 19th century colonial India. He said that one cannot be a political radical and a social Tory at the same time. The social Tory is the phrase Ambedkar uses. Indeed, one must have the social goal of emancipation as constant. And then he says that Ranade had this great virtue of pragmatism with always having the social reform and social, as I said, that the social, abolition of the basis of social discriminations as the goal. Therefore, politics cannot ignore social constraints and social realities for long. That's the important thing. To envision a new society, politics must know how to wait and how to make advances. A new nation cannot be created overnight. For a nation to be a commons, because the nation is the commons, the primacy of social reconstruction cannot be ignored for long. As the last decade of colonial rule began, Ambedkar found, sadly, the ardor for social reform in India had cooled down. He said, the craze for politics now held the Indian public in its grip. Politics had become an appetizer. The more one tests it, the more one craves it. Unquote. Ambedkar was pointing out the hollowness of the political universal, that is the universal hold of the nation, as the final frontier of politics. Now, it's a very short concluding section. So what does this reading suggest in terms, if we remember the problem? Gandhi was not late in responding to Ambedkar's critique and the call to reject Hindu religion as the way to annihilate caste. He said expectedly, some Hindu rituals and religious practices may be bad, but the religion was not. And Ambedkar had overstated the case. Gandhi's, the citation is there, you can read. Yet Gandhi's rejoinder could not address the fact that caste had been perched on religion that had emerged as an essential element of the nation. And to make the nation as belonging to all, the religious question must be faced. The idea of annihilation of caste was being determined by several other determinations, and in turn was leading to other determinations of religion, caste, liberalism. With the call for the annihilation of caste, a powerful idea was born. It was an idea that could be pitted against all universal claims of caste, nation, or religion that in effect denied justice. One may say the radical power of the idea of annihilation of caste stemmed from a yearning for justice, but this was not any universal principle of justice, such as one enunciated by, say, Plato, but the one that emerged from concrete determinations. So this was the great moment of a text in the life of the colonized. As if Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was saying, since history cannot be ignored because it tells us the deep fault lines of the society, we must recall the history of the depraved society and devote ourselves to addressing those fault lines in order to redeem the country. Only in this way we can make ourselves masters of our nation, while as of now we can see how few have been their own masters or masters of the society. What is the great moment here that I am referring to? It is the moment of raising the life question of the oppressed about the domination of few and the empty promises of fortune to them. What is great is a steadfast approach, determination in adversity, an idea that can pit itself against every event of discrimination, excommunication, and expulsion. With the call for destruction of caste, the internal struggle had been inseparably linked with the external struggle, which involves not only standing up to adversities, but to resist also the temptations and pleasures of an elect idea of the nation. Such a text cannot be but be a manifesto. A manifesto, as you know, the form of manifesto tells us, it is not a time-bound program. It is a particular form of expressing an idea, a congealed form of philosophy, history, politics, resistance, struggle, and glimpses of a desirable alternative life. The form of a manifesto is thus argumentative, polemical, pithy, but rhetorical by the highest standard. In short, a particular way to universalize one's vision of social transformation. The Annihilation of Caste is a manifesto of justice. Its reading is therefore never complete at one go. The call for annihilation of caste is a jump towards a universal cry. Though the form of the address, as I have mentioned, is a manifesto, but the call for annihilation, please note, does not come as rhetoric. It is an outcome of several determinations. Thus, Ambedkar first explains in the introductory communication to the organizers of the cancelled event, I did not expect that your mandal would be so upset because I have spoken of the destruction of Hindu religion. I thought that it was only fools who were afraid of words, but lest there should be any misapprehension in the minds of the people, I have taken great pains to explain what I mean by religion and destruction of religion. Then he says, one cannot have any respect or regard for men who take the position of the reformer and then refuse even to see the logical consequences of that position, let alone follow them out in action. Is it a call for annihilation of religion then? In the later part of the text, Ambedkar hastens to clarify, while I condemn a religion of rules, I must not be understood to hold the opinion that there is no necessity of religion. On the contrary, I agree with Barth when he says that within quote, true religion is the foundation of a society, the basis of which all true government rests and both their sanction. Consequently, when I urge that these ancient rules must be annulled, I am anxious that their place shall be taken by a religion of principles. And that's how Ambedkar goes to Buddhism. However, these clarifications by Ambedkar do not lessen the scorching light on the issues that Ambedkar himself is going to subject to determination. Each of these issues suggests connections with others in the process of determination, and I shall mention a few and conclude. Consider, therefore, the issues he raises one by one, explains, and moves on to the next thrust of the reply. Why social reform is necessary for political reform? Why social reform is necessary for economic reform? Caste is not just a division of labor, but division of laborers. Caste cannot preserve a non-existent racial purity. Caste prevents Hindus from forming a real society or nation. Hinduism is far from being a missionary religion. The worst feature of the caste system is an anti-social spirit. Caste deprives Hindus of mutual help, trust, and fellow feeling. It destroys public health, public opinion, and public charity. The real key to destroying caste is rejection of the Shastras. Destroying caste does not destroy the true principles of religion. And then that word line, the struggle is yours and I have decided to leave Hinduism. You can notice each of the issues he raises is in turn shaped by a few others. If you like, abstract notions such as reform, its possibility and limits, public sphere, its authenticity and dilution, religion and reason, the mutual conditioning of society and nation, and finally, the great question of truth. Thus, Ambedkar emphasizes again and again what is truly public. Basically, he repeats, a true nation, true equality, true reform, true reason, and true religion. Even though the invocation of truth cannot but attract our attention, yet you will notice Ambedkar never enunciates what is truth. The truth is held up as if as an elusive mirror against which the injustices are critiqued and judged. Principles are set forth not to enunciate any positive definition of a religion or any definition of social equality or justice, but to arm the campaigners with this great scepter of negativity by which all discourses will be henceforth judged. This indeed is an instructive instance of how universalism of the oppressed functions in human thought. The process of emergence of the universal is through multiple concrete determinations which relate to each other and condition each other. Thus, this process is concrete. There were quite a few such instances of the colonized producing concrete universal ideas, perhaps as many instances as were the awakenings of the colonized. The universal, the oppressed emerged in this way from concrete determinations. They are the concrete universals which become pathways to alternatives. In this way, they become the truth. Truth, and we are here speaking primarily of political truth, does not come from any special knowledge of the world or knowledge of the world to a greater degree, but from a political engagement with its own history. In this case, the historical questions, these anti-colonial thinkers like Fanon, I had actually a section where Fanon certain texts in Wretched of the Earth and Annihilation, they produce the same kind of effects. What is the state in which the colonial society finds itself racially and caste-wise abused, discriminated against, and dominated internally by a few and externally by a colonial master power? What is this history that pushes the society into the prehistory of slavery, into savagery, into the mysterious frontiers of inequality? How does this condition give birth to the state and a type of politics that perpetuates discrimination, domination, and inequality? Around these questions articulated in interrogative and polemical style, the principle of non-discrimination, equality, and justice was born. We have much to learn from the ways in which alternatives are thought out in human history, in particular in the history of our time. Recall, besides Fanos's wretched of the art manifestos like the Diggers and Ranters in the 17th century, that were authored and declared in a particular time, context, and style that became a treasure for a universal idea of justice. On the problematic of concrete universality, Marx had said, with an obvious allusion to Hegel, within quote, the concrete is concrete because it is the concentration of many determinations, hence unity of the diverse, unquote. Is it not what militant anti-colonial thought had proved time and again? Thank you.
Thank you, Ranabir. Thank you so much. Those of you who are not with us here, you must have heard the round of applause that followed this exquisite lecture. And I call it exquisite because it teaches us two things. One, how to be able to think about universalities while you have to deal with the concrete question of very specific, often denied universal status determinations. And second, how to read a book chapter by chapter, how to read a book by tracking its connection with existing ideas of the time, but also what comes after that. Ranabir finished by talking about Fanon, and we remember how Ambedkar was already in conversation with W.E.B. Du Bois around the time when he's writing Annihilation of Caste. He reminded us how Ambedkar, I don't think I can say he reminded us, he taught us how Ambedkar looks at the question of universal significance through three specific concrete determinations: the polarity between the political platform and social reform initiatives, between religion and oppression, and between caste and the nation. And he also reminds us that for the universal to emerge, it can only emerge after the removal or annihilation of what passes as the universal, which I suppose is also one of the ways in which the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate carried itself out in the 1930s. We have a very specific question here in the chat box, after which I think while we wait for others, we shall read this out. And if there are questions here physically in the room, we shall also take them. So the first question is from Manish Mascara, who asks, do class relations, both in empirical and ontological realms, possess the ability to account for the concrete universals in order to go beyond reform? That is so far the only question we have. So would you like to take that question now?
Class relations or caste relations?
They specifically mention class.
Class. Again, my response would be that there would be no, universal answer. You have to go back to the particular society, the particular time when class relations are being, referred to, with which the class relations are being referred to, the class dynamics. And only then we can say that they will have the capacity of that. But there is no universal principle of this is how it will work.
We don't have a question here as of yet, but we are waiting for a question from the room.
Thank you, Ranabir, for your thought-provoking presentation. So, while reading the text of Ambedkar, you have raised larger questions and connect with larger philosophical and social issues. So, I would ask you to, if you speak a little more on the how you have raised the question of the concrete universal and the abstract universal while connecting the question posed by Hegel and how Ambedkar. So just I have I do not know that how you particularly post Ambedkar as a critic of Hinduism as well as the colonialism. So is there any is it, in a sense that it is this universal arises that Ambedkar pulls out of many concrete determinations. But in imagining this universal, do you find some kind of, if we go through Ambedkar's life trajectory, some kind of liberal shadow, or in maybe if he interrogated that liberal shadow critically, but do you find any liberal shadow in Ambedkar's imagination of justice or the critique of the Hinduism? This is my question.
Yeah, it is actually a continuation of the same question. You, I think you did a fantastic job of critiquing his ideas on caste and the annihilation of caste without really mentioning the word, and if I'm not mistaken, nation. But you were a little more reticent about liberalism. So, are you conflicted with his notions of liberalism?
See, Ambedkar, in writing on Ranabir, Ambedkar says he is not a liberal. But it is true that Ambedkar was a great constitutionalist. He had the highest of the legal educations. He believed in rule of law. And he says in this text also, the undelivered address, that he believes that finally liberty, equality, fraternity. So you may say, but my point is, my approach would be, it serves no purpose. Meaning the problem that Ambedkar poses and the way he approaches it, the way he tries to negotiate it, it is quote and unquote, but this is not a word that I would like to use, but because you have read, it's post-liberal, in the sense that he is not giving any liberal. You may say that this is in the liberal framework. He is not saying, had it been a classic liberal framework, he would have said that the state would have, would have the power to do religious reform. In fact, he says that these widow, he says that this widow marriage, prohibition of child, all those things that are crucial for upper caste Hindus, the reformers have all focused on that. He says so. So therefore, he is trained. We all know how he's trained. But when he is thinking, part of it maybe is influenced. But the approach is, he has escaped the liberal ghetto. So that question, therefore, to my mind, would be, for this tract at least, that's the way actually he writes of Ranabir also. He says, I'm not a liberal. And he compares Ranabir with Phule. And he says, Phule was someone else. But Ranabir, but why Ranabir? I don't believe in the liberal principles. The way Ranabir thought, I don't think. But yet, I know what Ranabir wanted to do. And I want that should be learned. Ranabir never, preached any revolutionary solution.
Ranade was in that sense, very measured. Ranade wanted that progress should be attained step by step. But each time, the political step must have that social goal. And that is what Ambedkar was supporting. And his definition of religion is, meaning there will be no religion, the way he defines it, you can't have a religion. But on the other hand, this has nothing to do with liberalism, the way he defines. But if you see, the person he quotes is one of the arch conservatives, Barth. So I think he picks up from the several readings that he had, American, British, Irish constitutionalists. And Edmund Burke would be one of the first constitutionalists who actually decries the French Revolution, because the French Revolution has destroyed any legal validity of any state. That's not the way to reform a society. Burke therefore wrote on Reflections on French Revolution. But he cites Burke. But he cites Burke to do something. So therefore, I don't think Ambedkar was very much, bothered or engaged with the liberal, anti-liberal, that kind of thing.
I find there is a shadow, as you very correctly termed it, because I don't know, I think there is more of American influence in his life than you would give him discredit or credit for.
I don't know. All I can say that he was a constitutionalist. He believed in constitutionalism. He thought that by law and order and constitution, etc., things could proceed. But that was typical of his, appreciation of Ranade, that takes step by step, even though he had fought against the Congress, he had fought against the Hindus, but finally. But look, with all that, he couldn't stay in the team for long. He left Hinduism and he joined Buddhism. He took to Buddhism. So there might have been, I'm quite sure, as I said, that because of his legal training, he must have inherited some liberal principles. But reason is not the monopoly of the liberals. That is all I'm saying. Grant the non-liberals also the power, the right to practice reason. So if you ask me, Ambedkar is saying that you see, there are 2-3 things, and if Samata, I can, take 2-3 minutes more. Ambedkar's liberal in the sense that Ambedkar's, as I say, that there are 2 great things for Ambedkar. You may say that he is in a way preaching to universals without telling, as I wrote, as I said, that was the conclusion of the talk. One is the public. Hinduism is not a truly public religion. Caste system makes Hindus antisocial. But this idea of the public is, quote and unquote, a Western idea. The idea that you are not social in spirit. You can't have fellow feelings. You will not save the other person because you are so damned and so modeled by your casteist. Your being is the being a caste is being. Your existence is existence as a caste person. Even though you may think that you are Hindu, but you cannot take one step without your Shastric knowledge, without the knowledge of what Hinduism is, that has become your common sense. So therefore, you cannot become truly public. So this idea of something truly public, now is it Habermas public sphere and all that? That's where I say no. Because if you think of the time of 1930s, 1940s and early 1950s, or from 1920s, the Southborough Committee where Ambedkar gives the deposition and makes an argument for special constituents and everything for other backward communities. From then on, Ambedkar's main argument is that this Indian society, the Hindu society, is not a truly public thing. So you may argue that this is therefore a Europeanist idea. Because Jyotiba Phule did not, Jyotiba Phule had, if you could, you may argue that his struggle for justice and equality or non-discrimination came from a much more mystical or a much more, how would you put it? Mystical is not the right word, but let us say much more from a bhakti tradition. But Ambedkar is a rational man. Ambedkar is never invoking bhakti, even though if you read Ranade and Phule, and he mentions it, but he appreciates Ranade because says that, look, in this century, this is modern time, this is where you need, this is where colonialism is. You must have reason on your side. You cannot allow reason to be monopolized by others. So, to that extent, you can say that yes, he had liberal elements. But as I say, that that's not the right way in a post-liberal. But
Very well done. Are there any questions?
So there are 3 questions in the chat box. You want me to read them out all at the same time or one by one? Okay, so first question is from Shulagna Moitro. Shulagna asks, the teachings of Dr. Ambedkar seem to be more relevant now than ever. But do you think realistically it is possible to discuss these ideas as the current political environment seems less inclusive than before? I suppose I am wondering about the possibility of universalist ideas to flourish in restricted spaces. This is the first question. The second question is from Shudip Basu. Shudip asks, Ambedkar's seemingly deterministic framework of referring to the entanglement of caste and religion does not give adequate attention to the particularity of Hinduism, its functionality for a nation where caste exists concretely yet does not exist for some. Does he leave room for a casteless Hindu nation to emerge where Hindu religion, though it exists, yet it does not, as is seen in the contemporary political practice? The third question is from Rajeshwar Basu. Rajeshwar asks, race and caste are both forms of social discrimination existing in the USA and India. Do you think there can be solidarities established between the Dalit Panthers and the Black Panthers? There has been a recent meeting between them. Does it create space for radical political transformation? I'll just comment on the last one. The Dalit Panthers borrowed their name from the Black Panthers in the 1970s. And if you look at the logo of the Dalit Panthers, it is a direct riff of the Black Panthers logo. That's it. So these are the 3 questions.
I shall respond or try to respond to the last question first. I have no particular knowledge about, the possibility, no particular view on the possibility of, Dalit Panthers and Black Panthers making common cause. There are several reasons, but that will take us to other discussions. The only comment that I can make is that, there is an untold third here, which is the communist movement. And when the Dalit Panthers began, and even in the 90s, in Karnataka, you had Satyashodhak communist parties. There were various political movements that tried to combine. Some of the Dalit activists and leaders thought that there was no possibility of a platform of Dalit activists and communist activists, others. And Dalit Panthers increasingly became, not only critical, but they decided that making common cause with communists was impossible or would not serve any purpose. Black Panthers didn't have, they were one or two, but Black Panthers had a much more, because Black Panthers, the movement began, and the movement, I mean, everyone knows the history of Black consciousness, the writings and all that. They did not have that very defined attitude of negative attitude towards communism. And if you think of the relation between Maoist movement and the Dalit Panthers, you can see very clearly the Maoists have been extremely critical of such kind of activism, including indigenous activism, which think that the communist agenda of social revolution is inimical to that. So I have no particular, take on that. Hopefully, they can make common cause. I know there have been initiatives, but how far that will materialize, I have no particular. The second is on Shudeep's thing.
About the casteless Hindu system, which he seems to think is present now.
Now, all I can say is how would Shudeep respond to the following reply, that casteless Hinduism is in fact one latest ploy of the caste Hindus to appear as universal. So this is perception. The determination is material. It's not ideation. In other words, if we can show that we have a Hindu society which doesn't have caste, where intermarriages, where you do not need you do not require any reservation, you do not require any special provision for political representation, you will have casteless Hindus, but then casteless Hindus, and then you will have other casteless religion. But Ambedkar said that these caste Hindus have polluted other religions as well in India, because converts from, Hindus, they carried their caste. To Christians, they carried their caste. So Shudeep would have to, in fact, then, think whether this idea of the casteless Hindus, think of Dayanand Saraswati, Arya Samaj. It's not the first time. In fact, all religious reforms have argued that we will reform Hinduism so that there will be no caste, but there will be Hinduism.
Including Gandhi himself.
So, even though Gandhi was supportive of Chaturvarna, but Gandhi said that Chaturvarna was not evil, we can, its purpose is different. Gandhi was, at least, Gandhi said, in any case, that. But here, so therefore, with Shudeep, I am not very sure of the casteless Hindu nation. This is, this is the dream of, let us say, the reformers, that they will make the nation a casteless Hindu nation. So, if Shudeep asked me whether this is possible, my answer is no, but all I can say. The possibility of universalist ideas to flourish in restricted spaces, I do not know what it means. What does she mean by restricted spaces? All I said was concrete.
She's talking about the present moment.
Yes, no, I'm saying that the possibility of universalist ideas to flourish in restricted, universalist ideas flourish not because you have the windows open and fresh air is coming in, which may be partly true. So 1,000 flowers are blooming. But because you are negotiating and this is important, that you are negotiating the particular questions of the time. But each negotiation is done through several other parallel negotiations. In other words, it's a series of determinations of concrete relations, concrete determinations. Althusser would have said or said in other contexts that this is overdetermination. But I did not use the word because Althusser, when Althusser was debating on the Hegelian traces in Marx and brought in the question of, critique of Engels, that Engels said that economy determines, but determines in the last instance. So you cannot say that Marxism is economic determinism, but it determines only in the last instance. The economy counts, but counts only in the last. To which Althusser, it's a very famous essay where he says this last hour never arrives. The last instance, the last hour of determination never arrives. And he says what actually happens is that which we think to be the fundamental, which apparently in the last instance, it will be determined through a series of mediations. So ideology, politics, culture, habits, our language, etc. All the time, it is through these mediations that the ultimate reality or the economy appears. Althusser says, no, it never happens like that. And he brings in the idea of overdetermination. In other words, as he says, that this is interpellation. So in each determination, there is a possibility that there is. Here, what I am saying, I avoided that word because my argument is it has similarity with, resemblance with Althusser has argued, and obviously one learns from him. But my argument is that if one reads Marx very closely, and also Marx's criticism of Hegel, what Hegel wrote in the Logic and all that, Marx actually writes that these concrete determinations, they are never only one, they are not solo performance like. That these determinations are mutually impacting. So you can't treat caste in isolation from religion or say nation. You can't treat nation in isolation from caste or religion, or you cannot treat religion in isolation. You cannot treat the question of reform without thinking of politics, but you cannot think of politics without thinking of religion. But this thinking through the problematic, if it means that you are determining the relation always by bringing in other determinations, it is precisely through these series of mutual determinations and mediations that the universal is emerging.
We'll take a final question from Shubir Sinha. To what extent would you say Fanon and Ambedkar share common ground, given that, for one, colonialism and racism is the primary target of change, and for the other, colonialism and racism are the primary targets of challenge, and for the other, this is not the case? Is it that both have an underlying notion of justice, equality, dignity in their work? What about democracy? Do they have similarity in how they see its emancipatory potential? We'll take this as the last question.
Fanon, let us say, was an ideologue of the Algerian National Liberation Front. And Fanon treats, so that is where Paula or Arup, your questions are more relevant. If you compare Fanon with Ambedkar, that Fanon treats, in fact, everything that comes from the West with suspicion, but that's a very banal way of saying, because the Wretched of the Art ends with two remarkable paragraphs, where the last but one paragraph says that, I think I deleted that particular passage which I had originally, I had intended to read out. Fanon says that Europe had always set for itself ideas and tasks that were to be good for the entire human being, the universal thing. But Europe had always finally transformed those universal tasks to certain things that did bad for the entire world. So there must be something in presenting or in taking up universal missions. There must be something inherent in the universal mission that must be treated with suspicion. Any claim of a universal mission is something that must make you aware what is wrong in it. Is there a serpent in the garden? Do we smell a rat? But Fanon says that, look, Europe has failed, but that does not mean that the emancipation of man has ended as a task. No. Now it is the time for us to, etc., etc. So Fanon is very ambivalent on the whole question of universalism. But yet, if you see the Wretched of the Earth, particularly the Wretched of the Earth, it's almost, again, I'm saying that you can't stretch the comparison much. But just like in the Annihilation of Caste, the word annihilation features only in the title, and only once that too, in all those exchanges, letters, and Ambedkar's introductory note, only once. Wretched of the Earth, which is quote and unquote notorious for its preaching of violence, actually has only one chapter where Fanon says that violence has a cleansing role. You must soak your, hand in the blood of the enemy, etc., etc. That if you are not violent on the enemy, and if you have not practiced violence, if you are not going into liberation war, etc., then you are not cleaning yourself, because you are so much compromised with colonialism. And actually, Fanon has a great take on women's role in the Algerian Liberation War, how the women had been internally colonized in the Algerian society. And each of these cases, Fanon says that you must go all out against the enemy. And you must not hesitate to take violent things. In case of Ambedkar, obviously, you can see that the concern for democracy is much more, because constitutionalism, as I say, is the concern. How should the nation become? Can it be a democratic nation if it is caste bound? So, for Fanon, the problem, therefore, is not exactly the same. For him, the problem is erase each and every trace of the colonial existence, each and every trace. And that can be done by thoroughly eradicating the presence of the colonial people. Plain and simple. There can be no delusion on that. You cannot interpret it in any other way. In case of Ambedkar, the whole question is, what will you do with becoming independent with this society, with this thousand-year-long discriminations, with this entire Hinduism dominant, sitting on the shoulders of the society? What would you do? So before you get independence, first of all, decide, can Hinduism remain as the mainstay of a nation? And if you argue that it can be without caste, but Hinduism remains, he says, no, it can't be. Destroy caste. And if that means destruction of Hindu religion, so be it. Therefore, when I am refused, he says, when I am disinvited, when I am excommunicated, which means you haven't understood the task that you had taken. Your task of reforming the Hindu society will take you to a position where you will say that this entire Hinduism has to be rejected, has to be, done away with. That's his argument.
So how he reaches the whole question of quote and unquote annihilation of Hindu religion. He says, of course, that I am not suggesting that. But this idea that caste is actually born and it is rooted within a religion. It's, as I said, that can you have Christianity without race? And that's where if you discuss Christianity, he will say, discuss Christians. Don't discuss Christianity. You must discuss Christians. That abstract discussion of Christianity is a useless thing. As he says, discussion of Hinduism doesn't make sense. Discuss what Hindus do. That is their social being. So therefore, his take on universal is very, very, interesting. It is much to be learned. He never says that I am espousing any universal idea. But on the other hand, he is saying the Hindus, they have a particular, this is being. That's the ontological question, that you have a particular being. So I don't have to discuss Hinduism, but I have to discuss how Hindus conduct in their life. That's the way to know. Can you remain Hindu and truly national? Can you remain Hindu and truly public? That is the way, therefore, he argues.
Thank you. It is 6 p.m. now. Thank you, everyone who's present with us physically in the CRT office. Sorry, I was accidentally muted. I have the privilege of delivering the formal vote of thanks. So thank you everyone who have physically joined us here today. This is after 3 years. This is for the first time after 3 years almost that we are holding an event here at the CRT office. Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you to all of our participants online. We saw many new people joining our discussion today who we had not encountered before. We hope you come back to us to the many events CRT regularly puts up online. Please follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter handles, as well as the MCRG website to see what we are up to. Thank you, of course, to Professor Samaddar, who has consistently pushed CRG to explore new areas of research and thinking, and this is merely one of those new areas that he seems to be venturing into. Thank you, thank you so much for this. Thank you to the CRG staff, researchers, and the administration for organizing this fairly seamlessly. We were very apprehensive, but this seems to have happened well. Thank you so much to our support funders for the Institute for Human Sciences Vienna, the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia. Thank you to the Knowledge Democracy Collective, to the Deutsche Welle Academy, and the various other universities and institutes in India who have consistently been supporting us in the different activities that we run throughout the year. Thank you so much once again, and hereby we finish today's lecture. Thank you. The recording